Is the Biden administration doing enough to support Ukraine? Here to discuss this and more is U.S. Congressman Mike Johnson. He is a member of the House Armed Services Committee. He is also the vice chair of the House Republican Conference, and he represents the 4th Congressional District of Louisiana. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, great to be with you as always.
Well, let's talk about the situation in Ukraine with the Russians unable to advance with their ground forces. They've resorted to bombing many of the urban areas. Thousands have died, but yet the resolve of the Ukrainian people seems to be extremely strong. But they're continuing to look to other countries, as the U.S., for the military materiel they need to be successful. Are we going to be able to provide it?
Well, that's a great question. We hope so. You know, President Biden has delayed deterrence. He's delayed the delivery of lethal aid to the Ukrainians. And it's really interesting, very important, I think, to note. They've put up a heroic effort there, of course. They're not asking for American military boots on the ground there. They're asking for the ability to fight back. As we've seen in recent days, there's a real chance they could win this conflict with Russia, but they will not be able to do that. They certainly can't prevail if the Biden administration continues to sit on its hands and not deliver the weapons that are sorely needed and that we are prepared to provide.
You know, I don't think anybody wants to send U.S. troops into Ukraine, but that does not mean that we don't need a strong military. I mean, our military needs to be prepared to go wherever, whenever, to protect American interest. I mean, it is becoming quite evident that under the Biden administration, America's military's distraction with the social programs and other things that they're pushing makes America look weak on the global stage.
We are projecting weakness on the world stage. There's no question about it. And you and I are fond of Reagan's doctrine of peace through strength. And of course, that's been the history, the tradition of our nation. We maintain the peace through our strength. And even the perception of a weak America creates a danger for free people all around the world. Terrorists and tyrants and leaders like Putin use this as an opportunity. And so that's the dangerous situation we find ourselves in. The White House has failed on every count in that regard, and there are real world consequences for that. We're seeing headlines today that 10,000 civilians have been killed in the latest onslaught by Russia. This is taking a very real toll, and it's encouraging other terrorists and tyrants around the country, China and our other adversaries. So this is a very serious matter. Congress has been weighing in on this since last winter. I mean, we were getting intel, Tony, everybody knows now, as early as November. We knew that this was a reality, that Russia was arming on the border, that they would do this. And the Biden administration has dragged its feet the entire time. It sent exactly the opposite message. And it is a threat to liberty around the world. This is a very, very serious time.
We all know Ukraine has a documented history of corruption and government waste in the past. I know a lot of that has been being alleviated, but what gives you confidence that the Ukrainians are being entirely forthcoming and transparent with us when it comes to what we've seen so far?
So, at some level, that's why we do these audits and reviews, right? So we want to look at the evidence and then be able to assess independently where things are. As I mentioned, I went to Kyiv. We met with the Prime Minister. We met with the Minister of Defense. They told us they understood the importance of addressing corruption. When we were out there, actually, coincidentally, a number of corruption cases had been announced. They very strongly pointed out those did not involve U.S. security assistance or U.S. assistance generally. But having said that, they were corruption cases, and the point they were making is they were trying to address them. So, as I say, I've got a long history. I've been going out to Ukraine and working out there on behalf of the United States government for more than 15 years, and in the anti-corruption area. And so I hear what they're saying, and then we're in the trust but verify business. And the way we do that on this issue is by doing these evaluations that look at what's actually going on. Because again, there's sometimes a misunderstanding. We at the DoD OIG, we don't go out and count the missiles, right? We don't do the monitoring. It's up to the DoD to meet the requirements of the law and the policies that implement it regarding monitoring, and then we do oversight to make sure that's happening, that it's happening in accordance with the law and it's happening appropriately, and we make recommendations to help the DoD to improve that. So that's the process we're engaged in now, and as I say, I think we're going to continue to be engaged in.
Just had a good meeting with President Zelensky. I reiterated to him that we stand with him and against Putin's brutal invasion. The American people stand for freedom, and they're on the right side of this fight. I have asked the White House since the day that I was handed the gavel as Speaker for clarity. We need a clear articulation of the strategy to allow Ukraine to win. And thus far, their responses have been insufficient. They have not provided us the clarity and the detail that we have requested over and over since literally 24 hours after I was handed the gavel as Speaker of the House. And so what the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed. I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe, and this is because of the policies of this White House and this administration. We had 12,000 illegal crossings on one day last week alone, on Wednesday. We have almost now 280 known terrorists that have been apprehended at the border. None of this counts the gotaways. If you add the numbers up, it's almost 7 million people who have been encountered at the border just since President Biden took office, and at least 2 million gotaways. This is twice the population of my state of Louisiana. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 49 in this country. Fentanyl poisoning because it's allowed over the border. We have human trafficking and all the other terrible things. In the last 3 months, October, November, December alone, we've had more illegal crossings at the border than in any entire year during the Obama administration. The American people see this. They feel it acutely. They see all the terrible societal ills that come from this, and it must be addressed. So I've made this very clear, again, from the very beginning when I was handed the gavel. We needed clarity on what we're doing in Ukraine and how we'll have proper oversight of the spending of precious taxpayer dollars of the American citizens.
President actually just got off the phone with me right before the show, and he said he has spoken to you about this deal and that he is against it, and he urged you to be against this deal. He was President Trump was extremely adamant about that. Your reaction to that, given the fact that, look, he knows how to do this enforcement stuff. You don't need some new bill coming out of the Senate to get the border enforced.
Yeah, President Trump is not wrong. He and I have been talking about this pretty frequently. I talked to him night before last about the same subject. We don't have the text of whatever the Senate has cooked up yet. And so we have to reserve judgment, I think, to see what comes out of it. It doesn't sound good.
So why give him this in an election year, the cover of this deal that, you know, critics say is still going to let a lot of people in, but he gets to take a victory lap that he's gotten something done?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not going to let a bunch of people in. It's focused on actually turning people around on it. It is interesting. Republicans 4 months ago would not give funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for our southern border because we demanded changes in policy. So we actually locked arms together and said, we're not going to give you money for this. We want a change in law. And now it's interesting, a few months later, when we're finally getting to the end, they're like, oh, just kidding. I actually don't want to change in law because it's a presidential election year. We all have an oath to the Constitution, and we have a commitment to say we're going to do whatever we can to be able to secure the border. Just as a quick, for instance, the last 4 months, we've had 50 people cross our border on the terror watch list. 50. We've had tens of thousands of people that were declared by this administration a national security risk that came across our border and were released. It is our constitutional obligation to be able to secure our country as fast as we can secure our country. This puts in mandatory pieces that haven't been there in the past to make this administration actually enforce the law. I would tell you that I don't know of anyone that believes that if President Trump was elected, well, he was president right now, this border would not have this problem. So the thought that somehow President Biden can suddenly be the pro-national security president in the final months of this is not.
That he doesn't want you guys to move forward on this, and judging by his comments, he clearly wants to campaign on this issue. Have you spoken to him about the Senate proposal, and are you simply trying to kill this to help him out in the campaign?
No, Manu, that's absurd. We have a responsibility here to do our duty. Our duty is to do right by the American people, to protect the people. The first and most important job of the federal government is to protect its citizens. We're not doing that under President Biden. We have only a tiny, as you know, razor thin, actually a 1-vote majority right now in the House. Our majority is small. We only have it in one chamber, but we're trying to use every ounce of leverage that we have to make sure that this issue is addressed. I have talked to former President Trump about this issue at length, and he understands that. He understands that we have a responsibility to do here. The president, of course, President Trump, wants to secure the country. President Trump is the one that talked about border security before anyone else did. He ran on, as you remember, building the wall. Why? Because he saw this catastrophe coming. He knew that if we did not get control of it, we would be in this situation. And that's why President Trump took executive actions. He used his executive authority to get that system under control. President Biden came in reflexively and did exactly the opposite. And that is what has caused this crisis. It is well documented. I'm happy to share with you all, if you haven't seen it yet, our documentation of the 64 actions they've taken. At least half of those, more than half, could be immediately reversed with a stroke of a pen. And Joe Biden refuses to do it.
Mr. Speaker,
what we're hearing right now is not.
But were you offered a briefing?
No, I have not been. No, I've had individual senators call and give me tips and offered things that are going on in the room, but we've not been a part of that negotiation. And I have been absolutely clear from day one, since literally the next morning after being handed the gavel in late October, what the functional equivalents of H.R. 2, what those are and why that was necessary to solve the problem. I took 64 House Republicans to the border in January. We heard from the people in charge, the Border Patrol agents, the people there, and they said, these are the things that you must do to stem the flow. And the reason we have the biggest immigration catastrophe, border catastrophe in U.S. history is because President Biden took these actions. I can name them for you specifically what he did.
Speaker,
he does have executive authority right now.
That the House has complained, including today, that the House was essentially shut out of these negotiations. Langford tonight told me that the senators actually offered Mike Johnson the ability to sit down with senators, be part of these negotiations. He said this was brought to Johnson early on. Johnson said the House has already spoken, referring to that same bill, H.R. 2, and Johnson was loosely briefed, according to Langford, over the several months of these negotiations. But that doesn't mean this will change the inevitable outcome here, which could be the House Republicans essentially kill this. Though the first question, though, here, Omar, is can it get out of the Senate? The majority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, is expected to set a Wednesday procedural vote to advance this package. It would require 60 senators to get there, but a big question is, can they get there? We don't know the answer to that yet.
Траур. Майк Джонсон избран таки спикером палаты представителей. За него проголосовали все 220 республиканских конгрессменов. Джонсон не только ультраправый сторонник Трампа, всегда голосовавший против помощи Украине и делавший соответствующие заявления антиукраинские, как принято думать. Что касается все-таки Украины, то достаточно посмотреть на рейтинг поддержки Джонсоном этой самой Украины. Рейтинг очень плохой. Значит, все это устраивает нас с вами. В том смысле, что если новый спикер не давал никаких клятвенных обещаний, не заключал никаких предварительных договоренностей с проукраинскими однопартийцами, бюджет помощи Украине под очень большим вопросом. В общем, с фанатом Трампа в качестве спикера, предложенный Байденом биль на 106 миллиардов, уже, конечно, однозначно не пройдет. Джонсон его просто не поставит на голосование, сосредоточив внимание США, если выбирать внешний фактор, на помощи еврейскому государству.
Заткнись. Что послужило причиной? Вот этот вопрос от репортера ABC Рэйчел Скотт.
Господин Джонсон, вы принимали участие в кампании по отмене результатов выборов 2020 года? Вы все еще придерживаетесь того же мнения?
Заткнись. Следующий вопрос Скотту про поддержку Украины был тоже встречен насмешками.
Вы будете выступать за дополнительную помощь Украине?
Вы задали уже свой вопрос, уходите.
Конгрессвумен, которая кричит на репортера, Вирджиния Фокс из Каролины. Ее поведение у некоторых вызвало негативную реакцию.